Pediatric Speech Sister Hunjan, and she is from TeachBeats 365. I'm so excited to have her here. She is an excellent blogger, an excellent TPT store creator. I've used some of her materials myself when I was in the schools. And the reason why I brought you on here today, Nikki, is because I reached out to you in February after the tragedies, after Lunar New Year. And I think overall, there just needs to be a bit more cultural awareness and cultural responsiveness in our field, particularly for the Asian American communities. So I would really like to hear your perspective on that. The dog also wants to say hi, so just so bear with us here. But Nikki, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm so happy to be here today. So I live in Virginia right now with my husband and my 2 kids. We've lived here for over 10 years now, but I grew up in central New York. I am Korean and I am a transracial adoptee. I've always wanted to work with kids. I grew up babysitting. I think initially I wanted to be a teacher, and then I wanted to go to school to be a pharmacist and didn't get into pharmacy school and decided to change course. In college, I was diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder. And so I think that kind of got me interested in the field. And then, since then, I kind of haven't really looked back.
Well, I am so happy that you are here. You'll have to excuse me. I'm going to be going back and forth with mute because, again, like I said, my puppy's here. But I'm so happy that you made it to the field. I'm really interested about the auditory processing disorder. How did that affect you in graduate school?
So, I managed to get through high school I had some issues in high school, but I don't think it was ever enough where I went to get tested. I didn't get tested until college. But I know I went to a very small, I grew up in a very small, very rural town. So classes were a lot smaller. And when I went to college, you're in these lecture halls with tons and tons of people. And there's all this extraneous noise because there's all these people. And so I started to really struggle with that. And I also had a lot of anxiety around testing. And so when I got the diagnosis, the great thing about that was that I was able to get accommodations for testing. So I could test in a smaller, quieter location, and I didn't have to be around in the big lecture halls taking a test. So that really helped me. So it was more the accommodations that helped. And then I was pretty much, they didn't recommend therapy for me because I was pretty much doing all the compensatory things that you would teach someone to do. I do find that if there's a lot of background noise, that's when I struggle the most, especially if I'm trying to listen to a conversation, just because there's just so much competing noise. But I never did, therapy with it or anything like that. So it was a later in life, I guess, diagnosis.
That's really interesting to know. I did end up having speech therapy myself. I had trouble with the R sound. I always say people thought I was from Boston. So that's yeah, I know, right? So that's really interesting. So Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about your why you joined the profession?
So again, after being diagnosed, I had a friend who also had switched from occupational therapy to speech. And so she kind of alerted me to the field. I guess I wasn't really aware of the field before that. So I got interested in it. I took some, introductory classes and liked it. And I liked the idea that we could work in schools. Because I had always seen myself as a teacher. That was kind of the way I was going to go. So, I really have always liked working with kids. I do actually enjoy the older kids more than I thought I would. I'm working with high school kids this year, and it's been really refreshing to be able to have an adult conversation.
Yes.
And, it's just, I love the kids. I love the families. Seeing so much progress, developing those relationships with families. It's just, gives you all the warm, fuzzy feelings, I feel like.
So that does bring me to my next point then, because now you're in the high schools, and I noticed that
Mhm.
your materials are geared more towards the little ones. So
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about the story of TeachBeats 365 and how you are using them now, how you're using your work in that now?
Sure. So I started my blog and my TPT store in November of 2012, like long time ago.
Mhm.
And legitimately, when starting it, my only goal was to try to make some extra money to pay off my student loans faster. I mean, that was my only goal. And that was kind of before it became like I don't know, the cool thing to do to start a TPT store. Um, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. So, but I got the bug and I started to create materials and then like put them in my store and then, started to get a few sales here and there. And then it just kind of turned into so much more. Initially, when I started, I was anonymous because my employer at the time had something kind of weird written into the contract where I wasn't sure if they found out about it, if it was going to be okay. I was working for a nonprofit clinic at that point, and I just was like not really sure. And so I decided to stay anonymous, and I was anonymous for like 5, 6 years. Um, but then it became I feel like you came to a point where I kind of was stuck. Like I had hit a wall. I wanted to connect on a deeper level, and when you're anonymous, there's only so much you can do as far as connecting with people. So I think now I forget what year it was that I like revealed my identity. And it's been so great since then because I've gotten to be able to interact with other SLPs from around the country and then connect with, other adoptees. And I don't think I would have been able to do that had I continued to stay anonymous.
Right. And so that does make me think about what you would say your favorite thing about being a content creator. And you mentioned how your audience, you're able to connect more with your audience. Who do you notice reaches out to you the most?
So when I first started posting, kind of from the adoptee perspective, other adoptees were reaching out. Other SLPs would reach out too. But I will say when I started my TPT store, and for several years after that, I don't recall seeing any other Asian creators, SLPs, really anybody. That's changed a lot in the past couple years, which has been really nice. But before it was like me, myself, and I. So, um, you know, lots of different people will reach out. I mean, I try to keep my Instagram pretty real because I feel like we've all kind of experienced burnout to a degree, especially after COVID. And I didn't want to be the rainbows and kittens kind of person because our jobs are hard and life can be hard sometimes. And I wanted people to be able to relate to that, and get some realness. Not that other people aren't real on Instagram, but like you've kind of fall into that trap of like my therapy has to be perfect and that my room has to be perfect. And so I wanted it to be more like real, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, definitely more authentic. Because when you're saying that, I'm just thinking about how it's more refreshing when you come from an authentic lens. We suffer
Yes.
from perfectionism, and that drives imposter syndrome, and especially when we're people of color, it just hits different. I don't know, it just hits really
It
different.
does. It
So
does. And early
mhm,
on, I felt like I had to kind of keep up with the Joneses and be what I saw everyone else doing and be what everyone else was. And I'm like, it's in the last few years, it's become more apparent to me. It's like I can just be me and you can take it or leave it. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect me as much as it used to. Um, but I think we all experience that imposter syndrome at some point, and it's hard. I think I still experience it even 13 years in. Like, I don't
mhm.
know what I'm doing,
Who
you
does?
know. Really, exactly.
So how would you say you got over that imposter syndrome, especially as an Asian American woman? How did you get over that hurdle of just being completely you?
I don't think I've gotten over it. I think
Okay.
it's a conscious effort every day to be like, especially I think it was scary starting to speak out about things that were important to me,
Mm,
like, trans rights, um, from an adoptee's perspective, like adoptee rights and feelings and things. That's a little scary. Anytime you're putting yourself out there and being very vulnerable, which is a lot of what happens, it's scary. And so, I'm less focused now on, like, I don't really care about my follower count, like, whatever. And I mean, if I happen to look at the insights and follower count and things, there's a clear indication of after I post certain things and what happens to the follower count. And
Yeah.
again, I'd rather it be that way. But for a while admittedly, that was important to me because I felt like, well, I can't compete with everybody if, I'm not doing whatever they're doing. But it became more of like, I wanted to be more authentic, as you said, and speak up for things that were important to me and things that I felt were important. And in doing that, it kind of took away some of the fear because it was like, it's important to me and I'm going to speak about it. And if you don't like it, feel free to go.
Mhm.
You know,
There's this thing that I read or heard about, like, soulmate followers or something,
mhm,
where
yeah,
really you want people who are more aligned with you. So I noticed as
yes,
I started being more authentic in my brand instead of being more flowery, like,
right,
"Oh, we're in harmony," and now I'm more like, "No, actually, these are real issues that affect real people." I started
yes,
losing followers, and it's actually been even harder to build my following since I've been speaking
yes.
out. So I do
It,
really
agreed.
go ahead.
Yeah, agreed. I see that too, and I think that watching this whole SLP, TPT, Instagram kind of movement has been very interesting because I'm not going to say I was like original. I think I started kind of like before, just before it became the in thing to do. And then I've watched it kind of change over the past 10 years. And I think that with me, followers grew slowly, but kind of steadily. And I think the ones that have been around for a while are like loyal, like ride or die kind of people. Um, the other ones that have kind of picked up along the ways, some of them might not be. And so I do think that when we start speaking out about things that not everyone might agree with, and that's okay. I think that there's certain things you can agree or disagree on. Like, I've seen this, people say like pizza toppings are one thing, but for me, it's like human rights are not something that like you can, but again, there's the door, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, and I guess they call them touchy issues for a reason
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So we have here, Kaylee. Kaylee, hate to call you out, but she reached out in the chat box, and she was one of the students who I was mentioning who reached out and talked about being a transracial
Yes.
adoptee and especially in
Mhm,
an academic space. And
mhm,
she was also mentioning how she was feeling a little isolated because she was speaking out about things that mattered to her, but
mhm,
she was getting gaslit by her academic department. Do you
mhm.
have just any words, especially your journey on being a transracial adoptee in this field, in this space?
Yeah. Hi, Kaylee, first of all. Um, I will say that with my department, I mean, and I commend you for speaking out. I didn't, from my experience, I didn't really experience any kind of pushback. But again, I also wasn't I wasn't speaking out about things because at that point I was still, I don't know what the word is. I hadn't really kind of come to terms with all of this stuff. So that's only happened within the last, I'd say, 5 years. Um, and I'm in my 30s, so you do the math. Um, I think that you have to stay firm with it, but also kind of give yourself grace because especially if you're the only person speaking out about things, that can get very exhausting. And, you know, I'm obviously not telling you to stop doing it. It's important. I guess my question is, are you the only one that's speaking out about it? Um, because that can make a difference. I mean, if there's more than just you, like I said, if it's just you, it can be very, very isolating.
Mhm.
Um, as far as she's going to second year. Okay. Um, as far as I'll give you a little backstory about my kind of coming to terms with it.
Mhm.
Um, in 2020, when George Floyd happened, um, that just I don't know, that hit me in like a total, as I think it did a lot of people, hit me in a vastly different way. And I think that was the catalyst for a lot of things happening. And I started to really be thinking about my life. And, my parents are white. My brother and I are both adopted from Korea. And we grew up in a very, very white, very rural town. And so looking back on my childhood, I feel like I did everything I could to kind of blend in. I was very shy, like painfully shy. I didn't rock the boat. I was a follower. I was very much trying to blend in. And obviously, I wasn't going to because, hello. But I was protected in the fact of like the very small town I grew up in, everybody knew me. Everybody knew my brother. Everybody knew my parents. I was in this bubble. But then I went to college, and that's when I really felt like I was in this weird space. And other transracial adoptees will probably identify with this, that I wasn't brought up with, Korean traditions. I wasn't brought up with the Korean language. I didn't know any of that. And so I felt like I didn't fit in with that part. But then, like, I'm not white, so I don't fit in there. And so I felt like I was in a very weird space, and I still am, because people will make assumptions just looking at you. And so then you're dealing with these microaggressions of like, I mean, I can't tell you how many people walk up to me and speak to me in whatever language they think I speak in. This happens more often than not in the airport. It's a TSA agent. Like, I cannot tell you how many times it happens there. Other Asian people will also try, and I always freeze and lose all sense of like language abilities at that point, because I don't know what to say, especially if I feel like they also don't speak English, because then I'm like, I don't know what to do. So it's been a very long, difficult kind of journey to kind of figure out who I am and where do I belong, and all of that. I just saw Kaylees comment come through. I'm not the only one, but okay. Avoiding time. And yeah, I think that that's hard, because if other people want to kind of avoid it, it's hard. I feel like I don't really have any good advice on this part, because it's hard to be the only one speaking up. Especially if you've got people who are unwilling or just flat out don't want to even address it. And that may be their own defense mechanisms of like, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to, speak out, because I don't know what kind of effect it's going to have on me. And I think that that's unfortunately what all people of color have to deal with. Like, when is this going to benefit me, or is it ultimately going to make it worse for me? So yeah, I being a transracial adoptee has really, looking back, impacted my whole life. And I'm still trying to work through the myriad of ways that it's impacted me. Because at the end of the day, I'm walking through life as an Asian woman, and people are always going to make assumptions. And how do you deal with those assumptions? And then you got that part, and then you got the part internally where you're like, do I want to search for my biological family? Do I not? It's a turmoil of like tons of different emotions at like any given point, and little things can be triggering. So yeah, I don't even know if I answered the question.
Kaylee does say that she resonates with your experiences so much. I do want to ask you, for other transracial adoptees who go through this, how have you been able to manage the myriad of emotions? Like you mentioned,
Sometimes
how do
I
you
do it well, and sometimes I don't. I mean, the one big thing that I finally did was I found an Asian therapist. When I first started going to therapy, they were not Asian, and it was fine, but I got to that point where I'm like, I really need someone who is Asian and who maybe will be versed in adoption trauma, because that's like a whole nother level of things. And so once I found an Asian therapist, I've been meeting with her, on or off. Like, we don't have regularly set. Basically, I just email her when I feel like I, need to schedule a session. But it's been very good because a lot of the stuff you just don't have to explain to her, like, because she's also an Asian woman, you know? Um, so I think finding someone who specializes in the adoption trauma has helped, but also who looks like me. Because I don't know how you feel, Melanie, but like now I'm outside of DC, so it's much more diverse than where I grew up. And I have had many, many more doctors who look like me. And that in itself is kind of a comfort. Like when you go in and you're seeing, like, you see a mirror, for some reason it just makes you feel like 10 times better. At least for me it does.
Yeah.
So that's been helpful. I think getting out of my small town,
Mm.
being in a much more diverse, area. My kids are biracial too. My husband's Indian, so it was very important to me to have my kids go to school where there's more diversity and where they would have a higher chance of seeing people who look like them. And so I'm so grateful, even though the cost of living is ridiculous here.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful that we are in a more diverse place.
I really like how you mentioned the representation topic because I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. So if you can just imagine Oklahoma predominantly white. I mean,
Right.
Tulsa, we do have the historic Black Wall Street. However, there's been a lot of gentrification. So, of
Yes.
course, there's that. So I left to go to Washington, D.C. for college and stayed there for graduate school. And as you know, as you're saying, it's very diverse. They called DC Chocolate City at one point. So I always say that I was born and raised in Tulsa, but I grew
Mhm.
up in Washington, D.C. because that's where I
Okay.
felt like I could be myself. That's where I felt like I learned more about myself, about my culture, about my heritage. And so, yeah, I definitely agree, especially when in healthcare, just finding those people who look like you and you don't have to over explain your experience. I
Right.
mean, right now I do have a white Latina therapist and
Mhm.
honestly, she really is great and she does her best to understand, but there's still that like wall where I
Mhm.
feel like you don't really get it though because you don't walk the
You
same
haven't lived it.
yeah, you haven't lived the experience. So I 100% get what you're saying. Now, as a TPT store creator in this space, an Asian woman who's a TPT creator, what has been your experiences? Because I do know I remember when we were talking to each other on Instagram, there's definitely a bit of comparison in the success, even. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, being in this kind of game for over 10 years, I've definitely noticed, and again, it's hard to because I don't think it's any one person. That's not what I'm getting at. I think it's, the field is, 92% white. So, like by, statistically, you're going to have more white SLPs anywhere because
Right.
there's just more of them. So I don't necessarily think it's that. I think that, like I said, more Asian SLPs I've seen on Instagram more, and so I love connecting with them because I feel like there's community, and it's been so long since I think it's only really been in the last couple years that I've really seen it pick up where I'm like, yay, there are more. Um, you know, Asian SLPs, Black SLPs, basically anyone that didn't look like, the 92%. So, um, I do think that, yeah, do I have to maybe work a little bit harder to be seen, to be recognized kind of thing? Yeah. And I don't know the reason for that. I think people just gravitate towards what they know and what they're comfortable with. And for whatever reason, that usually is people who kind of look like you. And so that's been difficult to kind of feel like um, you're kind of on the outside. And I think, unfortunately for me, that also it's compounded by the there's some adoption trauma in there too. So it's that maybe not feeling good enough. And that comes from, I think, a couple different parts for me. And I don't know if other adoptees feel like that. Every adoptee is different. So, and their experiences are different. so again, I don't want to ever speak for anybody else, but I think for me, that's what I've noticed, that you kind of feel like you're kind of on the outskirts. Um, when you notice collaborations on things, I think people should pay attention to who's collaborating. Um, where are the opportunities being afforded? Are they being extended to people of color? You know, it's it's it can be a hard space to be sometimes. Social media is, a blessing and a curse sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. What's coming up for me when you're saying this is I've been on a few consultation calls, and I love the grace that you extend. I don't think that the 92% are intending to be racist. I think that just like what
Agreed.
you said, you just gravitate towards what you know. So just like how, I'm a Black woman, I'm going to naturally gravitate towards Black people and want to reach out to the BIPOC community. And so it,
Right.
it is vice versa. And sadly, it seems like there's a divide, but it's also just the reality. However, at the same time, I do think that the 92% should also make the effort to
Yes.
extend those opportunities out. And so I do really appreciate you also saying that, because that's advice that I give. It's like, hey, if you want to be a culturally responsive organization, these
Mhm.
are those specific steps. So it's not necessarily just being anti-racist. It's
Right.
also just simply just saying, hey, oh my gosh, I know Nikki also creates content. Let me reach out to her and ask her.
Right. It's
So
that having the opportunities and making sure that, other people, which, it does kind of have to be put on the 92%, I think, because we're trying out here trying to like scramble to like even get a foot in the door. But if they're in there already, you know what I mean? Like, give us a hand
yeah,
kind
no,
of thing.
literally reach your hand out and pull us
Right. And
in.
and say that, like you said, like there's and I do think there's room for everybody. I mean, I don't want this to become like it's us against them kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
But at the end of the day, there's power in numbers. And obviously we know where the numbers are. And so, they've got to be the ones to kind of, like I said, help us out.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because I do think that that just simply has to be heard. I think that from my perception, it might from our white colleagues, it might seem like, oh my gosh, our BIPOC colleagues are just so mad at us, pretty much. Like they're ticked off at us,
yeah.
and we're even scared to reach out to them because they're angry.
Mhm.
But I think that even BIPOC people can be a bit more graceful with where
Yes.
they're coming from too. So I think
Yes.
that there's work to be done on both sides when it
Yeah.
comes to
Agreed. And I'm always willing to have a respectful kind of dialogue with anybody. I'm not gonna just be like, well, I'm not pointing fingers and like you did this and I'm willing to have an open dialogue with someone who really does want to understand it better. Um, but you got to be willing to kind of hear some maybe not so some hard truths.
Mhm, mhm.
And I mean, and I'm the same way. Like this journey started not so long ago for me, and trying to figure out all of this. And again, the journey to be anti-racist it doesn't end. It's we're always going to be working towards it. It's not an end point. And I still have work to do on that. We all do, but it's it's a long game. It's not nothing that's going to happen overnight.
I agree. Well, since we are on the topic of extending grace, what would you say that we could do to be more culturally responsive to our Asian American creators and colleagues?
I think it's, including us in, any kind of collaborations.
Mhm.
Think outside of who you normally go to for collaborations, you know? Yeah, you've got your friends that you love and you collaborate with all the time. But think outside that. There's tons of other people I mean, and not even just on Instagram, that have knowledge and have a different perspective and that might benefit you. Um, so it's, you have to, again, social media can be one of those, it can kind of sometimes feel like high school where you're like, I'm not popular. Like,
Right.
it can kind of feel like that. And you find community kind of where you can make it. I've met so many amazing people that I literally have never met face to face, um, because of social media. Like, I love it for that reason. But it then can become a very big comparison game of so and so has this opportunity or so and so has whatever is happening. Um, Pay attention to who you purchase from. Everyone's got their go-tos, and that's fine. Everyone's got their favorites, that's fine. But branch out, make sure that and it's hard too because on Instagram, like, we're comfortable putting our personal views out there. Not everybody is, and everybody is on their own journey with feeling comfortable. And some people might have different views on, like, I feel like I shouldn't address that because it's not I need to stay in my lane kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I felt like that a lot earlier on. And for me now, it's more of like, is this a human rights issue? If it is, then we're all human. So we all should have some kind of stance on it. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
the big one that I'm following now is trans rights. And I just cannot understand. Like, I cannot understand why this is so hard. I,
Yeah.
I like legitimately do not understand.
Mhm.
Trans people
Yeah.
are just trying to live their lives. They're not bothering anybody. But for whatever reason, it is like some people just want to just, I don't understand it,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And it's just, I veered off from your question again.
I mean, trust me, it blows my mind too, and I try to intentionally stay away from the news because it
I do too, because God,
really
I can't.
triggers me. But I happened to turn it on, and I'm thankful I saw this because, just like with other BIPOC voices, LGBTQ voices are also kind of hushed in our field. There's only so many speaking out against what's going on. And so I always
Mhm.
see the AC Goldberg translating. I always see
Yes.
Wes speaking out. I always see gender
Mhm.
affirming voice speaking out. But sadly, it's really just them right now with that big platform. And so you really don't know what's going on still, which is very
Yep.
hurtful to them, by the way. I see it. But I happen to just turn on the news and I see that they're trying to take away healthcare from trans
Mhm.
kids. What?
Yeah. Uh,
In 2023. In 2023. And
mhm.
so I like how you said that there is no such thing as a lane when it comes to human rights, because at the end of the day, we are all human,
Mhm.
one, and actually, especially when it comes to those minoritized groups, please speak out because we're
Right.
minoritized. There's not
Yeah.
enough of us. There's powers in numbers, just like what you said. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that issue also to the show today.
And I do think people need to start getting comfortable, kind of like with being uncomfortable. And yeah, will it mean that you might lose followers?
Most likely.
Maybe. But does that really matter?
Mm,
It's not. I know everybody. It's their businesses. It's sometimes it's their only livelihood. I get it, but like, I don't know how you can ignore some of this stuff. Yeah, Florida is scary. Kaylee's saying
Florida
about
is
Florida.
scary right now with everything.
If I lived in Florida, I would be trying to just leave. I mean, point blank. DeSantis is scary.
Yeah.
Um, and it just and then I'm hearing. I don't know if you had heard about that they're trying to claim, like, parents who get their trans children gender affirming care, that, like, that'll be labeled child abuse. Like,
Yeah, I saw that.
what?
That's exactly what I saw. That's exactly what
What?
I saw.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, I think back to your original question, how can you support it?
Mhm.
Be aware of who you buy from. Maybe take a chance on somebody else. Um, if you're gonna spend your money, I think look at where you're spending it. I do think make sure people's I don't necessarily know if your people have to align with like what your beliefs are. You know, but I do think that you have to pay attention to where you're spending your money. And again, try somebody new. You might be surprised. And really just branch out, you know? It's and again, there's not very many Asian American TPT SLP people.
Yeah.
I still don't know of very many. I think I can count on like maybe one hand the ones that I do know. So
Can you shout them out? Because to be honest with you, I can only think of you, Nikki. I can't.
maybe it is just me. I
Yeah,
don't know.
honestly,
If
yeah.
there are more, hopefully they'll comment and with their stories so that I can make sure I support.
Mhm.
But for a while, I feel like it was just me, and I don't know if there are any that I know of. So yeah, we have to. I can't think of any off the top of my head though. That could be mom brain.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
a real thing.
I have to ask. Like, can someone actually tag their favorite TPT stores? And yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people will say Nikki, but yeah,
Maybe I don't know. I've been around for a while, so I don't know. Maybe I am the only one, but that's sad. And that's the other thing. Like the this is a plug for something I have in my head. I
mm,
really would love to connect with other BIPOC SLPs who want to start a TPT store and focus my energies on that and answer questions and things like that. So that's kind of a summer project right now. My life is extremely busy and I have to wait until the end of school year. But I would love to have, monthly Zooms where I answer questions and things like that because I'm no expert, but I have been doing this quite a long time. And so I feel like I can answer basic questions and to get more BIPOC SLPs on TPT so that there can be more of a community of people doing this. Because again, it helped me pay off my loans. It's again, it's not a get rich overnight kind of thing. It's a lot of work, but
mhm.
I would love to see more people do it. So that's in my head. That's what I'm thinking about doing.
Well, we're very excited about that. Please put that out there because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about all of the SLPs to be who need to look up to, just
Yeah.
someone to look up to. I mean, even Kaylee, I know she had to leave, but I mean, I'm just looking at her comments and I know that this was very enriching for her because it's isolating. It could be
Yes.
very isolating.
Tell her she can DM me or we'll chat.
Okay, yes, I will let her know. Well, Nikki, I do wanna ask, are there any other changes that you would like to see in the field? And also just ways that we could be more sensitive to transracial adoptees in the profession?
I mean, I think we'd all like to see more diversity in the field. Um, that's like kind of my major thing. As far as being more sensitive to adoptees or transracial adoptees, I think you have to be aware that trauma exists. And I have a very good relationship with my adoptive parents. Like we're very close, but that's not always the case. And I do firmly believe that with any adoption, there will be trauma. It's unavoidable. There's trauma from the very beginning, no matter when it happens. Because a lot of people will be like, "Oh, they're babies; they don't remember." I don't think that's true. So I think two things can be true. You can have a quote positive adoption experience, but you can also have trauma, which is where I feel like I fall into. And also like it, the big thing for me is remembering that trauma is there. A lot of adoptees struggle with anxiety and depression too. I struggle with both of those. So I think I forget what the actual numbers are, but is research that there tends to be a higher rate of those in adoptees. So I think being very sensitive with that. And I think people really need to pay attention to the questions they ask adoptees because the the very triggering questions are like off the top of my head, like, are you going to search for your biological family? Like, um, is so and so your real sibling? Like I get that all the time. But and then what they mean is biologically are they your siblings?
Right.
And I don't know why people think that they can like perfect strangers will just ask you extremely personal questions under the guise of kind of like conversation. but the questions are very triggering. So I think we have to be aware of the questions you're asking adoptees. And I mean, make sure that person is in the space. Make sure it's okay with you that they're asking, that you're asking that of them. It can just be very triggering to bring up those things. And, it's just mental health to me is a big deal. And I, again, want to go on the record and say, I'm not against adoption. Like I'm not. But think about who is centered when you're talking about adoption. Like, how do we see adoption? I just made a post about this recently. How is adoption portrayed in movies and books, in TV shows? It's usually, I mean, I think it's almost always, it's this happy, like rainbows kind of situation. And what that's doing is it's taking away the kind of the voice of the adoptee. And it's usually the adoptive parents that are kind of centered in this. It's not the adoptees. And I feel like anytime adoptees speak out or say anything that's even remotely negative, people just jump on you. And it's like, well, you should be grateful. You should feel lucky, those kinds of things. And it's almost like, but you're telling me my experiences aren't valid. You're telling me my feelings aren't valid. And it's, I'm supposed to just smile and be like, it's all right. So just be aware of that. If you're interacting with an adoptee, whether it be, a child on your caseload or anything, I'm firmly under the belief that any adoptee and any adoptive parent should have mental health resources from the get-go. Because ultimately, especially transracial, I don't know that, yes, she's right. She just said white saviorism is very real in the adoptee community, and it is. But I don't think anyone prepared adoptive parents for, like, what are you going to do when your child experiences some kind of racism? It's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. And it's not like, I said to my mom, we were having a conversation about this, and I was like, what am I supposed to do? You can't follow me around for my whole life. To be there, to address whatever, that's not realistic. But it's going to happen. So just the mental health piece is very big. And I feel like if I had mental health resources from like early on, that would have maybe helped a little.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just be aware. Trauma exists, and it always will in these situations.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your story. I definitely agree that, of course, not all of us are transracial adoptees. So we don't know exactly how to address it and how to approach it. So I do appreciate you bringing those questions to the forefront too, because just like what you said, people don't necessarily have bad intentions when they're asking, but it is a sense of ignorance. It's just like, oh, so when are you going to reach out to your old parents? It's like, that's not a cute question. Please don't ask me that question again. So I really do appreciate you and your vulnerability in that, Nikki.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, where can people find you if they have any more questions about your new program that is coming up? I'm going to kind of push you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, now I put it out there. Now I got to do it.
Right.
So TeachBeats 365 on Instagram. It's the same name on Facebook, though I feel like I'm never on Facebook anymore. I do have a private Facebook group. It's called SLP 365. It's linked in my Instagram profile, so you can join that. I do send out emails, newsletters, but I'm on Instagram more than one person should probably be. Yeah. So if you really want to get in touch with me, DM me there, because that's where I'll see it and respond the quickest.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Well, I can't wait to talk to you all next week on the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. We are going to have our faves at the Bold SLP podcast coming on live. So we'll wait until then. Thank you again, Nikki. I'll see y'all next week. Bye.